Hello everyone, it's time for another Set 13 deck profile. I haven't done a deck profile on this deck for a while, but this time it's on the Alma Jester Bico Masques deck because it got some support, not much support I must admit, but decent enough changes that I would say relevance a deck profile, especially from set 12 where we got outside support in a way that actually helps this deck quite a bit. But anyway, I would have to say this deck is just fun and cool in design concept, but it still has one huge flaw that it heavily relies on soul charging triggers, mainly crits, because this whole deck's playstyle revolves around critical triggers. And being Dark State, of course they need to go to the soul. And considering that you need to use a lot of RNG and you have only 8 crits in the deck, it still has this one issue where you need to have those crits as soon as you can. If you don't, you can say that you're going to be screwed. That's all I'm going to really say. But if everything goes right, then you are winning the game. Because yeah, it gets very strong, I'm not going to lie. But if things don't go right, you're going to be screwed. But other than that, I have to say this deck is just fun and cool in concept. I just love the design of the witches. And not everything is a witch here, which is another thing. But other than that, only like a few updates here and there. Not really super much changes, but enough to make it a bit relevant, especially from set 12, where we got basically indirect support, even though it's outside archetype support, and I'll show you why later. But anyway, let's get on with the deck. So let's start off with what is the one big change of the deck. Evil Eye Beast Omnia Kitty. Yes, this is a Omnia Gruzio ride line card. And I'm going to explain it through the ride line with Omnia Gruel, which has the skill act once per turn, cost Soul Blast 1, look at top 5 cards of your deck for 1 grade 3 or greater Omnia Gruzio and add them to your hand. But if you did not reveal a card, you soul charge 2. This helps with the soul, even if you do have to do -1 soul compared to the original ride line, but it's more consistent thanks to this one, Omnia Owls. Because when you write it on top of the grade 1, you search your deck for 1 trigger and put it to your soul and draw a card. That's why it's more consistent, because you directly soul charge a trigger and you get to draw, compared to Duna, where you need RNG to basically get you the draw. But the upside of the original ride line is that Duna, this one, which along with this one, lets you call both units from soul. And that's basically the upside. This one still gives you your soul charge while you still don't lose a soul, but potential RNG draw. And this one has the unique skill of counterblasting 1, choose 2 trigger units from your drop zone and put them soul and plus 5k. So you get the potential +2, but the consistency of needing the crit in soul is very important. Hence why I'm deciding to run the Omnia Gruzio ride line, because this one guarantees you to put a trigger in soul, which is going to be your crit, and you still get the draw. And this one lets you soul charge 2, which is basically kind of the same thing as the Alma Jester ride line, except you have to soul blast 1 to do it. So in a way, it's just reversing order, but more consistent because you now get the actual crit in soul. Very important. In which we go to Alma Jester Astroea Unica. So she has 2 skills and both skills are linked to each other. So we're going to start off with the second skill, where when this card attacks a Vanguard, you can Soul Blast 3, bind all the critical triggers that you Soul Blasted for the cost, and then activate the following abilities. If you have at least 1 crit in your bind zone, choose one of your opponent's rear guards to retire. At least 2, crit +1. At least 3, dry +1. So basically she gets stronger the more crits you get. Once you hit 3, you're all set. And being a card that can basically just retire with a crit and triple drive every turn is quite powerful, even though you are sacrificing your critical triggers for it. And I have to say that skill itself is actually pretty decent. But the first skill is linked with the second skill, where when a trigger unit is soul blasted by the ability of your Vanguard, choose one of your units, gets plus 5k power into the end turn. That's just pretty decent because obviously you're going to be soul blasting 3 triggers, aka crits, and basically just mass power up in the board. So you get free power, you get crit and retire, you get triple drive on top of it, so you get plussing as well. This is just really good for that when everything goes right. But of course the RNG of getting those crits and soul is going to be a thing. Luckily the first skill is not linked to the crits, and it could be linked to any trigger, so that is very helpful. But the second skill, needing the crits, is where you really need to get those crits and soul. Hence why I'm running the Omnia Gruzio ride line to increase the consistency of getting your crits and soul, because that one at least guarantees you 1, and you can still soul charge 2 from your grade 1, which will still increase some consistency of your RNG. Now with the 50 card main deck, that might change up a bit because RNG is going to decrease a bit, but it is still pretty optimal to get your consistency off. Next, sort of for Persona Ride or for Bico Masques, but depending on scenario, you might want a Persona Ride, because if you have 2 crits in the bind zone, Bico Masques might not be the best option, because Bico Masques is a build crits over time card, while this one just needs at least 3. So better pressure in early game because of the crit. And speaking of Bico Masques, we go to Bico Masques herself. So first off, you could of course only ride on top of her base form. And the second skill is that you can remove her old identity, aka different name from herself. Choose one of your opponent's rear guards, retire it, and drive +1 to any turn. This skill I would say isn't too bad, but unfortunately Bico Masques does lose one key aspect of her old identity, and it's that one extra crit. That retire and drive isn't too bad, in which she trades off that crit for her next skill. When this card attacks, you can counter +1, Soul Blast 3, buying all critical triggers from the cost. Choose one of your rear guards and stand it, and this and that unit gets +5 key power for every 2 critical triggers in the bind zone. So basically my idea with this deck is that you would use Astroea Unica to basically regular bind your crits for early game pressure. You're going to use Bico for the finisher, because this one is a re-stand rearguard skill, and it requires you to build up your crits over time. So if you could build up at least 4 crits, then that re-stand is actually pretty decent. If you only got really 2 crits, then it's not really that great. But sometimes riding this might be better than being on Astroea Unica, due to the fact that you really cannot fulfill Astroea Unica's full condition, that it actually might be better for you to get the re-stand skill. Because at least that this one is active regardless. You get the re-stand regardless of how many crits you have in the bind zone. And that has been key sometimes, but once again, relying on the crits is a bit of an RNG factor here, but the restand has been pretty strong, especially once you build up those crits in the bind zone over time. Once you hit like 4, restand is quite powerful, even though yes, there are some decks that do it better. Now that Counter Blast can be a little bit of an issue sometimes, because yeah, Counter Blast has got a little bit heavier in this deck. And then finally, 2 Mask of Hydrogram, because this is a mask deck, but because I'm not going to Bico as the main grade 3 as soon as possible, that's why I only run 2. Now to the grade 2 lineup. Keats Peak Griffin, which on plays you can choose 2 triggers from your drop zone and put them to soul if your Vanguard's Alma Magister. And then the second skill is that if you have a critical trigger in the bind zone, +5k power and shield on your opponent's turn as well, which is not too bad. But once again, you need to get those crits as soon as you can, which is why 4 can be a little bit iffy sometimes. But it is a pretty decent card to run. In which we go to Phonograph Oppressor, which is a new card for set 13, where if your Vanguard's Alma Magister, you can counter +1 to draw. This is very helpful to basically just get out your pieces faster and filter out your deck. You really need to get those crits as soon as you can, so this is just very helpful. Although the Counter Blast might be a little iffy. And the second skill is that during your turn, this card gets 5 key power for every 2 crits in the bind zone, which is pretty nice, I'm not gonna lie. But once again, rely on the crits. In which I run a generic mask card, Lukaikia, where when placed on rearguard, if your Vanguard is masked, you can counter +1, look at top 5 cards of your deck for 1 grade 3 or less card with a different name from this one and call it to rearguard, and then choose a trigger unit from your drop zone and bind it. Now, I was thinking of bumping this up to 4 if it wasn't for the fact that it requires your Vanguard to be masked. Because 1, you're not always going to be guaranteed that trigger in the drop zone, aka mainly the crit, but 2, you're not going to be on mask on the first grade 3 ride most of the time. Hence why I'm running this at 2, because this one at least is better than Phonograph Oppressor, because this one lets you, well, look at the top 5 to call something and gives you the bind. And of course that 1 bind is very helpful, but once again it's RNG on the crit. But at the same time, it isn't too bad, so once you're on mask, this is actually pretty decent, which is why I'm running 2. But the second skill is that during turn, if you have 3 or more trigger units in your bind zone, +10k, which Astroea Unica will already do that with her skill if you actually manage everything properly. And then 2 Mask of Hydrogram Searchers, just so you can search for your Mask of Hydrogram, and also being a unit also is very helpful, so that's why I decided to just run these. And into the grade 1 lineup. Twin Marble Dragon, which I am thinking about cutting out for the next card, because its skill is that when you Soul Blast 3 or more cards at the same time, it's going to be through both Astroea Unica and Astroea Bico Masques. You can look at top card of your deck, you can either leave it on the top or put in Soul and +2k. Being able to peek is okay, but the 10k boost is also very helpful, and the choice Soul Charging can also be nice, especially when there's another card other than your Vanguard that can trigger this skill. And yes, this has been proven a little helpful sometimes, instead of just doing the RNG Soul Charge. But I am thinking about cutting this out to do because of the condition, because there's other more useful cards basically. Probably running Swirler instead. Next, which has the skill when this card boosts, if your Vanguard is Almagester, choose one trigger unit from your hand or drop zone and put it to your soul. If you put it from hand, you draw a card. This is just overall very helpful because of course it lets you respawn your soul, and it's basically the Falcate of the deck, except it's just for triggers. And of course this is just very helpful because of it. You need those crits, and recharging your soul is just very helpful. And then we got 4 Goomdoom Ram. Generic Soul Charge on place, and you can Soul Blast 3 to draw a card. Very helpful because of course you're going to be filtering out your deck. You're going to have plenty of soul most of the time, and you're regenerating your soul pretty quickly for another reason. And 2, you can trigger Twin Marble Dragon with this because of Soul Blast 3 condition, which is also very nice. But you mainly do this for the Soul Charge and basically Soul Blast any unnecessary card to filter out your deck, for basically the draw of course. And then, of course, finally, 4 PGs. And in trigger lineup, the OT, you have to max out your crits because you really need those crits. 3 draws because you really want to get your pieces as soon as you can. And finally, 4 heals, 2 being counter heals. So that's it for this deck profile, set 13 Almagester, or the Bico Masques deck for set 13. What do you guys think of it? What other cards would you recommend? Or what should I swap out? Honestly, this deck still has that one same issue, that is RNG on crits. You do have the Omnigruzio Ride line, which can consistently get you 1 crit, but other than that, and few changes, I would have to say the deck is practically still the same. You do have the extra support now to basically get you some extra filtering, which is nice, but now it's a little more counterblast heavy because of it, although counterblast is still the biggest issue for the deck, I must admit. But other than that, the deck still kind of functions the same way, and it's still kind of fun. And basically it's just really strong if everything does go right, but if it does go wrong, then you can say you're kind of screwed. And yeah, there are scenarios that things don't really turn out really well because it's RNG based deck, because you need to soul charge those crits as soon as you can, which we still don't have a card to substitute for a crit, and we are still limited to 8 crits. Luckily, with the one Omnigruzio Ride line, you can consistently search for 1 crit. But yeah, this deck really needs some help with basically just consistency of getting that crit out. But other than that, I just have to say the deck is fun. If everything goes right, like I said, it goes right and it beats down your opponent. If it goes wrong, then unfortunate. But other than that, that's it for this, and see you all next time. The deck does look cool. My only waifu deck.